Hello everyone, hope you're all having a great day. It's been a while since I did one of these deep dive Helldivers 2 videos, but I'm glad to be back on doing them. And today we're going to be looking into the Orbital Airburst Strike. After spending some time playing around with the Orbital Airburst, I've compiled a nice and informative list of tips, tricks, and what is ultimately just my quick guide to the thing that I like to share with you all. I've only used the Orbital Airburst a handful of times when I first unlocked it, never really taking it more than once in a session, and only occasionally so returning to it once in a blue moon when the personal order requires for you to use it. After my week-long bonding session with the stratagem, I can definitely see why some people enjoy using it, and I myself can now definitely vouch for its usefulness in certain situations, and that's what this video is about. I'm going to be breaking down what I learned about the Orbital Airburst in the hopes that those who take it with them in their dives can fully know what to expect. A quick breakdown of the video before we begin. We'll first start with the basics, and this will be the surface layer details that the game provides us with and what we would generally expect from the Orbital when we use it. Next, we'll go a little more in depth about the Orbital Airburst, looking to certain aspects such as the range, the spread, the burst, and the damage. After that, I'll share my gameplay experience with you. I'll identify what parts of the Orbital Airburst worked well and what weaknesses did it show in certain situations. Then, I'll go over some neat tips and tricks I learned about the Orbital Airburst as well as some interactions with it that are helpful to know. And then lastly, I'll share my thoughts on the Orbital Airburst Strike, saying my 2 cents on the stratagem and if I think it needs any changes or not with its current state. Also, a quick disclaimer, everything I've learned and will be sharing is based off of my observations using the stratagem. If there's anything I said that you feel like should get more attention, then let me know in the comments. It helps me learn more things and I get to spend more time discussing with the community about a game that I love, so it's a win-win. And if that's all good, I'd like to welcome you on board the Force of the Stars, a name that I felt was appropriate for the Orbital Airburst since it rains a hailstorm of shrapnel from the sky. We'll kick things off here in the ship management menu, which has the details of all the stratagems we use, and I like to start here for my deep dives because it lets us see what the game has to tell us about it. For the Orbital Airburst, it just simply reads, a projectile which explodes while airborne, creating a deadly rain of shrapnel, not effective against heavy armor. The example video associated with the Orbital Airburst here shows it being used on some pretty lightweight enemies such as warriors and scavengers, not even showing enemies that aren't necessarily heavy armor but still a lot stronger such as brute commanders and nursing spears. Something that the video does show that isn't mentioned in the description, but is very important to know nonetheless, is that you actually get 3 airburst strikes with every call-in. More on the description, it states that the projectile explodes while airborne and that is not effective against heavy armor. And these are 2 things that we will attempt to verify in this video. Also, I never mentioned this in my other deep dive videos, but I want to highlight it here just specifically for this stratagem. But the input code for the Orbital Airburst has to be the most simplest out of all the different stratagems here, needing only 3 consecutive right arrow inputs to call it in. When you do call the Airburst Strike in, 3 rockets will be fired and will come down and detonate overhead, showering shrapnel. The rockets are fired 3 seconds apart, giving the Orbital Airstrike an ongoing duration of 6 seconds, starting from when the first rocket detonates. If you were to include the travel time of the first rocket, the duration would then be 9 seconds. The shrapnel that rains down is pretty strong and will reduce you to ground meat if you decide to linger in the blast zone. Even if you were to wear explosive resistant heavy armor or the bomb suit with that high armor rating, you'll still get popped like a gusher. The Orbital Airburst has a range of 20 meters, so make sure you and your teammates are safely away from the area when you call it in. It's great for clearing small groups of enemies that are clumped up, and its cooldown of 2 minutes is fairly short, so be sure to be aware when it goes off of cooldown so you can call it in. Beyond that though, that pretty much wraps up the basics, and now let's get a little bit more in-depth look on the Orbital Airburst, and we'll first start with the rocket that's fired. Now the Airburst rocket, unlike the stratagem icon shows here, will not always come directly from above. More often than not, the rocket will come at an angle, and this is important because it affects the range and possibly the overall effectiveness of the shrapnel after the rocket explodes. Like the other orbitals you call in, it all comes from your super destroyer up above. If you're able to, take note of where your super destroyer is so you can get a better idea of what to expect from your airburst when you call it in. When playing with other folks, it's hard to know what super destroyer is yours, but they are generally grouped up together, so it won't make that much of a difference. Depending on the angle, the airburst rocket won't always go off on the spot the stratagem was called in. It might deviate 5 to 10 or so meters. To explain that, let's quickly talk about the detonation. And the other airburst weapon we have in the game, the airburst rocket launcher, has its rockets detonate when it is in range of an enemy. Imagine, if you will, a sphere around the rocket that when it is near an enemy, it detonates and explodes. That's the proximity detector that, when triggered, will tell the rocket to now blow up. For the Airburst Strike, I believe the proximity detection to be only active below the rocket. I believe that as it is flying through the air, it would check constantly to see if it's at least 20 or 25 meters or so away from the ground, and if it is, it will detonate and explode. I believe the proximity detection to only exist underneath the rocket because I've been able to call it in beside a tall cliffside and see it detonate right next to me. Now, when the actual rocket explodes, it fires a lot of shrapnel, and this is visualized through sparks you see on the ground and small impact craters after each explosion. It's tough to say how many points of shrapnels hit the ground exactly because of the randomness of the spread, but I want to say there's about 10 points of impact from the shrapnel. As to how you can predict the shrapnel, it kind of goes back to the angle in which the rocket is coming in from. Once the rocket detonates, the shrapnel goes out in a cone, fanning out from the tip of the rocket being the origin point. If you were to throw the orbital airburst on top of enemies and the rocket comes from above, it will detonate and distribute the shrapnel the way you expect it to. If it was to come at an angle, it will distribute again with the tip of the rocket being the origin point and then fan out in that way, causing it to burst and spread in a not so direct top-down manner. Building more on that, if your super destroyer was not directly above, you need to be a bit more mindful of exactly what you call in the airburst strike. Because normally when you see a group of enemies, you throw your orbital right on top of them. However, if you were to be in the situation where the group of enemies is here and your super destroyer is kind of far off to the side, you might want to throw your stratagem a little off to the side as well. This is because when the rocket comes in, it will come in at an angle, and when it detonates, the shrapnel will come out in a way that it will be able to hit that group of enemies if you angled forward correctly. If you were to throw it right on top of them in this example, the spread will form in a way where it misses that group of enemies, catching only a couple on the very side of the spread. Now, with all this in mind, the angle, the spread, the detonation proximity, you can definitely throw this in ways that will either maximize the airburst strike or get you and your team killed. I actually have an example here of trying to use the orbital airburst to destroy a spore tower. It can, by the way. But you'll see that it detonated above the tower because the proximity detection saw that there was terrain underneath it, so it exploded when it got within range. And normally when you call in the airburst strike, it will detonate above ground level because the floor will be what normally triggers a proximity detonation. But if it detonates above a high structure, such as a spore tower, its effective range can widen. You can see that I'm about 30 meters away from the call-in location, and even though the rocket came from overhead, it still detonated at a height where the spread was able to reach me and kill me. You can see from this visual that the closer the airburst is to the ground when it detonates, the tighter the spread. This is imagining it from a simple top-down delivery. So if it was to come at an angle, you can also see how it would spread in that way. And the last thing I want to say about the rocket is that every rocket in a single call-in will all follow the same path. And what I mean by this is that in one call-in, one rocket won't approach any different than the other. So after you've seen the way the first rocket detonates and explodes, you'll already know what to expect from the following two, because they'll most likely just mimic the way the first rocket behaved. That's it for just the rocket. Now for the shrapnel and the spread, and I've been spending lots of time throwing this airburst strike just to see how random the spread is, so much so that the seasons change, and it truly is just that random. I do believe that there are 10 impact spots for each strike, and sometimes they are close together and other times they are more spread out. I also believe that the explosive radius for one of the impact spots are large enough for them to overlap, and there's also damage fall off, so if you were to be caught at the very edge at one of those impact spots, you'll take a hit but you'll live. Since the impact spots do seem to be large enough to overlap, I also believe that the multiple impact explosions are able to be stacked, so if it overlaps and hits the same enemy, that damage can amplify and do a lot of work. Beyond that though, that is my present knowledge of the airburst strike in regards to both the rocket and the shrapnel. And if you guys feel like a point here needed more attention, or you have some fun, interesting things to share, please do so in the comments. It's really fun to break these things down and look into it analytically, and to hear your guys' thoughts on it and opinions as well is also just as fun to go through. So please let me know how you feel about it. But we're going to move on now in the video to gameplay and use cases. I'm going to start with the bugs, and it's great against the Terminids. And orbital airburst strikes are great responses to bug breaches. Enemies are always going to be clumped up since they all spawn from a concentrated point, and the bug breach lasts a while, so it's nice that the airburst strike attacks in waves, pretty much long enough for the entire spawning of enemies during the breach. You'll be able to rack up easy double-digit multi-kills, and the only things coming through would be heavy, such as chargers and bio titans, which you and your team can handle. But they won't be an issue since the airburst strike will wipe away most of the small and pestering mobs, such as the hunters. In higher difficulties, you will get multiple bug breaches on a single engagement, and they will generally be close alongside another, meaning so long as you throw your airburst strike in that general area, you'll still get a good return from it. Other general situations where I like to throw the airburst strike are into bug nests, objective locations, and patrols. Starting with objective locations and bug nests, more often than not, there will already be a group of bugs present in those areas. The orbital airburst is great when approaching these locations and softening up the numbers, making it easier for you to engage the terminal or to close up the bug holes. Patrols are great to use it on too, because that's another situation where bugs normally gather, and I like to throw it more so on a group of bile or nursing spears rather than a group of, let's say, hunters. And the reason for that is because when you throw the stratagem in, they'll be aggro towards you, and the moment it lands, they'll already start gunning towards you. But with slower moving units, you can easily predict the movement and still get a good barrage with the airburst. In terms of the damage that it does, the airburst still does really well against the bugs. Even though, like the description says, it's not good against armored units, some of the bugs' armor isn't all around them. It'll be in places where the airburst is still able to make good damage, and it's still a good choice to use against them. An example being the hive guards, whose armor only applies to the front. and since the airburst strike comes from above, it's still a good option. Chargers do have armor on top of them, but the explosive damage of the airburst is still strong enough to attack their soft spot. It even trigger a bleed out. Everything far in between, such as brute commanders, battle spewers, and stalkers, can all die to a single airburst strike. The only thing you can't quite kill with it are battle titans. It's hard because their armor is really strong, and since their vulnerable underbelly is too high off of the ground, the explosive impacts can't reach it the way it does for the charger. Since battle titans can't be stunned, it's very unlikely they'll be even stationary enough for the total 3 rockets of the airburst call-in. Lastly, if playing in high difficulties, you might have them even spawn during a bug breach, and if they were the first to spawn, you might run into the unfortunate situation where they tank a lot of the explosive shrapnel meant for the smaller bugs that are now spawning below them. Overall though, it's amazing for the bugs, and as for the automatons, you'll see that it's still good, not as good, but it still gets the job done. Similar to the Terminids, you want to use the airburst strike when enemies are grouped up. And for the bugs, it's easy because the way they normally engage with you is they try to overwhelm you with numbers and group up and kind of swarm you. But for automatons, they will take range engagements with you from afar from multiple angles. And since they aren't so often grouped up together, it can be kind of hard for you to get a lot of value from a single call-in with the airburst strike. Some places where you are sure bots will be grouped up are in places like objective locations and automaton outposts. When it comes to bot drops, they are grouped up there as well. And more often than not, this is the best place to call it on. Just be sure that when you do throw it, that the dropships will have already left, since they can tank the shrapnel the same way that the Battle Titan does. Aside from that though, bot patrols are also a great place to throw in the stratagem, because on the high difficulties, those patrols will be made up of high threats such as rockets and heavy devastators, and the Orbital Airburst does a good job of taking those on, able to kill them in even one burst. In regards to the heavy enemies, it really depends on the spread of the airburst, and for the Hulks, it can take maybe 5 to 6 rockets. For tanks, it could take around 2. And for the cannon turrets, it could take around 7 to 8. It's hard for the cannon turrets because it's high off of the ground, so you'll need direct hits with the explosive shrapnel, and explosive damage from the rest of the impact spots won't be able to reach the weak spot of the turret. When it comes to factory striders, it won't work well against them the same way it does not for the Battle Titan. It's too tanky, there's no access to weak spots, and it's so high above that it can block a lot of damage. Even though it doesn't do so well against the automatons as opposed to the Terminid, it's still a great option for taking out groups of devastators and softening up those objective locations for you and your team to move on once it's done. When it comes to specific missions from Bring This On, I can think of 2 that are great for the Orbital Airburst. The first is the Evacuate High Value Assets mission. These are good because there are defined choke points in this map that enemies will funnel through, making it easy to get a lot of value out of a single call-in since they're all grouped up together. The second mission is the Conduct Geological Survey mission. This is because the best places to use the Orbital Airburst would be when enemies spawn, and either via bug breaches or bot drops. When you activate the sub, and even the main objective, the drills, the enemies will spawn, and having a response to a high number of enemies spawning is great since you'll have the breathing room to do the terminal inputs and complete the mission. So that's it in terms of gameplay and use cases. Now on to some tips, tricks, and interactions. And the first thing I want to talk about here is the explosive damage of the Orbital Airburst. When I see something that has the explosive trait mentioned in the ship management menu, I want to see if it can help in taking out side objectives and enemy structures. Unfortunately, the Orbital Airburst is not a very strong tool when it comes to its destructive capabilities. It cannot destroy bug holes, it cannot destroy bot fabricators, it can't destroy gunships in the Sabotage Airbase mission. It can't destroy stratagem jammers, rogue research stations, shrieker nests, and even spore towers. It can destroy Terminid eggs, the illegal broadcast tower, automaton stockpiles in the Sabotage supply bases missions, and even storage containers. When it comes to the Super Earth settlements, it's able to destroy the walls and the fencing, but can't even destroy the houses. It truly seems that the Orbital Airburst is just meant for taking out those groups of lightly armored enemies. And you know what? Hey, it does a great job doing that, so no complaints here. When it comes to how it interacts with your other stratagems, the only thing that will let you survive an Orbital Airburst will be a shield generator pack or a shield generator relay, but they can only tank 1 rocket hit. The exosuits do you no benefit, and it's able to destroy all of your sentries and trigger all of the anti-personnel and incendiary mines. When using the Orbital Airburst, there's operation modifiers that can affect it, but the only one you need to look out for is the atmospheric interference modifier. This makes it so that your orbital stratagem scatter is increased, and this only affects where your rockets go all together, so each Airburst rocket won't land in its spot different from the other. They'll be inaccurate, but they'll be precise. When it comes to loadout options, you generally want to bring a nice variety into your missions and have all your bases covered. For the Orbital Airburst specializing in clearing those lightly armored enemies, you may want to take some options for dealing with those heavy armored units, such as an EAT or a Quasar Cannon. I also like to take stun grenades so I can make sure that a patrol of Devastators or a bug patrol with a Charger will remain in the AoE of all 3 Airburst strikes. Against the bugs specifically, I like to take the jump pack so I can position myself up above and have them all group up around me, making the single Airburst strike hit almost the entire lot of them and really maximizing the use I get from a single call-in. When it comes to armor, I don't believe the explosive resistant armor will help you out much, and given the possibility for a wider spread of the airburst, I also don't like to take any of the heavy armor, so I can make sure I can run away to a safe spot. I do like to take light armor to run away from it fast, and also armor with the servo-assisted passive so I can throw it really from afar and make sure that it just covers the whole objective area before I move in. I just want to also mention just simply being aware of the map's geography. On the Conduct Geological Survey mission, the last objective is always in the location where the drill is between these two large rock structures. Be aware of where your super destroyer is and where you want to call it in because a shrapnel might not even hit the intended location. It might just get caught in one of those tall rock structures. Another example will just be aware of the planet beyond the modifiers, just the actual generic planet geography such as Vernon Wells, which features these very high cliff sides that might block your airburst strikes directly. But overall, the Orbital Airburst Strike is really easy to use and very effective when used well. I've gotten some of my highest multi-kills using the stratagem, and it's made responding to enemy spawns a lot easier with a sustained fire on a certain location. I think in terms of where it is in comparison to other orbitals, it's at a great spot and it's a great choice amongst them. I don't believe it's in need for any buffs or changes, and if you haven't gotten a try to using it, I highly recommend doing so. And that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you like what you heard and like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. I make a lot of Helldivers 2 content such as these deep dive videos, and I have a lot more planned in the future, so if you're interested in content like this, be sure to stay tuned. I'm also curious to see what you all think about the Orbital Airburst Strike as well, so please let me know your thoughts, opinions, and experiences with it in the comments below. I enjoy reading it all and responding to them. And again, I appreciate you all for checking out the video, and have a nice day.
We push closer to the cleansing of this infestation.